Here I'm using one of my students' character, Ritas, to illustrate how to create human IQ rigging system which creates a realistic skeleton for our 3D characters. It's very important to know that before we start with a rigging process, we are fully done with modeling and texturing. Also, the next step is to clean up the mesh. Each piece of geometry that is going to be rigged needs to have cleaned history and cleaned channels. So we need for each of them to go under Edit Delete by Type History and also Modify Freeze Transformation. Another important step is to create groups of items, so to organize them in the outliner. In this case, I have a single group for the whole character, and inside this group I have the head group, which includes these three elements. And in fact, if I go further, I can see that they are parented to each other. This little element here is parented to the string, which is parented to the head. Then I have another group, which is the head, and it's compound of the face and two eyes. Finally, I have the body, which has arms, legs, and neck. And there are the shoes and pants and shirt. Now, when our characters have clothes, it would be a good idea to delete the inner areas of the geometry. For example, if we have to see the skin of this character, I'm clicking Command 1 in Mac or Control 1 in PC and see that this area is deleted because this is a geometry that cannot be seen from the camera when we animate. So it's a good idea to get rid of this geometry up to the point that it's not visible from the camera. So with this being said, having all the transforms to 0, 0, 0 and organized outliner and cleaned mesh, we can go ahead and set up a human IK rigging. Under the rigging menus, we can go to the control panel, create control rig. Once you create this window is going to open up. A valid skeleton definition is required. Do you want to create or define one? If I say to this one cancel is the same, I can have create skeleton, I can go here, or I can create it from here. So we can cancel here for now, and I want to show you that we have this characters panel, which inside it right now it's none. We don't have any character defined yet. But when I start creating the skeleton, you're going to see that there is going to be character 1 created. As you can imagine, the first step in this human IK rigging system, which creates a pretty realistic skeleton in Maya, is creating the skeleton, which I'm going to create. And once we create this, we see that a very default type of skeleton is created here. And the skeleton panel opens up with lots of more options that we're going to go and define before we can accept this. But notice that we got the character 1 now created, and earlier was none. So we are at character 1, and let's go back to skeleton because it went down. We have 3 tabs here, definition and controls. Another thing to mention here is that we need to set up the size that we want the character to be in the world before we adjust the skeleton to it. And reminding here the fact that we have a scale based on centimeters. This character here looks to be like about 4 to 5 foot little boy. Next, we're going to adjust the skeleton to be around the character size. And there are a few things that needs to be taken into consideration when we do this. The first thing is that we need to, if possible, move the character closest to the point of the skeleton, because the skeleton is created at 0, 0 in world. And so by looking on all the sides of the skeleton, we can move the character a bit forward like this one. So to match closest to the position of the skeleton. The idea is to not move the skeleton a lot around it. So first we adjust as much as we can the character around the skeleton, and next we go ahead and match those skeleton for our character. Another important thing, as you can see here, is that you do not want to rotate the skeleton. You want to keep those rotation channels clean as they are by default. And so you need to move the skeleton by being in different orthographic views. Move in X or Y or Z direction. So here I'm trying to adjust it and I'm rotating a bit this arm because it's not in the position for getting the skeleton without rotating it. So instead I'm rotating the mesh and remirroring on the other side to be able to adjust the skeleton. Next I continue putting those in the right place, and finally I'm going to match the hands. I finished matching the skeleton to the character's mesh and showing it from close. This is the way how it looks. I tried to match the joints to the mesh to be perfectly matching the placement where the mesh is going to deform. The same for the elbows, placing in the right position where the deform is going to happen, and also the fingers. I started by adjusting the scale of the character. So I had to go and put some numbers like 0.5, 0.8 until I kind of generally matched the character's mesh at first. Another thing is that I added one spine join. Now there are these roll bones that you can use, and those are for more advanced type of rigging. We can decide the number of fingers. If the character does not have 5, you can remove some, like pinky for example. We can remove pinky and have only 4 fingers. And I'm gonna go back because I need the pinky. This character is modeled for 5 finger hands. Now each of these fingers has a number of bones that you can specify. For example, if I want 2 instead of 3, I can just write 2 here and bring pinky back. But in fact 3 is good, so I'm gonna go back to 3 fingers. And the same for the feet. We can define if we don't want just one joint. In this case we don't have toes, so is this toe base just one joint holding this foot. But if we want to go and have more toes, we can go ahead and add those here. In this case we don't need them, so just the toe base is good enough. One thing we could do here is bring this for having some nice deformation here on the foot. We can go ahead and have these index with one join, and so here we can have a bit of bend in the foot. It's looking good as it is. The next step would be to go ahead and check out the definition. Now the definition tells us how good those joints are placed and corresponding to the mesh. So in this case we see some green colors and orange colors. Now if you see some red colors here, it means that there are some error going on. These are warning colors. Is telling us that the right arm doesn't seem to be parallel to the x-axis. And the truth is that they are not parallel, they are bended a bit because that's how the model was modeled. So it's a great advice to start with a model that has the arms fully parallel to the ground. But we're going to allow these warnings to pass, and everything else looks to be fine. Another useful way for using Human Eye Key is by bringing your own skeleton. If you have a custom skeleton, you can bring the skeleton, adjust it the same way as we did for the Human Eye Key, and then define it here through the definition by going on and selecting each of the joints and matching it up with the joint that is in the joint hierarchy of your custom rig. One thing to mention here is if we, for example, want to work with hands or arms, there are these little triangles that shows you that you can click on there to go inside the hand or foot structure. So for example, if I go to the hand, I go inside there and I have to define those fingers. And then I can go back, and if I want to go to the foot, I can do the same. Now one thing I've done here is I've added one toe, and so this is the these joints that you can see here, the same way here. So I have to go to the other foot for this, or I can use the mirror. Something that I might need to fix here is this joint alignment. Doesn't look that great. So take your time and do the good work here with joint placed for supporting the best deformations first, either with an Human Eye Key rig or a custom rig. And finally go ahead and lock this definition. If we want to name the character, we can go ahead and rename this, and let's call it Ritas. The next step is to create a controller, and after we create a controller, we can skin the mesh. A better procedure would be to skin the mesh first, since we have just the skeleton right now, and then apply the controller. So both ways are right, but it's easier to do the skinning first. So I'll go ahead and select the skeleton, Command or Control click the character, under Skin, Bind Skin option box. Here we can keep everything to the default except the skinning method, which is a much better option, the quaternion instead of the classic linear. So we can change this. And the maximum influence is the number of joints that are being influenced per vertex. We can leave everything to the default and bind skin. When I release the mouse from the joint, you can see that the joints have colors telling us that they are binding the skin. So if I select one of them and try to rotate this mesh, you can see that the skin is binded. Now something is telling me that the joint orientation is not correct for this one. As you can see, this manipulator should be in the alignment with this joint orientation. So I'll go back because first I have to orient the joints. I'm going to go back before this skinning happened, and go ahead and select all the joints, and under skeleton we can go under orient joints, click on that, and these settings, default settings are good. The primary axis should be the X, and it would give us a good orientation. Again, remember, if we have the character facing on the Z-axis, this would be the appropriate one. That would give us easiness in animation, and I will go ahead and apply. So now what this does is that if we go to this component mode and go ahead and select these components here, we can see that the orientation is the x-axis goes downward the stream of the joints. So when we go to rotate this joint, it's going to give us the right orientation for the joints. Get back to the object mode, and so when we select now this joint, you can see that the rotation is showing us the right direction. So now we are ready to go ahead and skin the mesh. Again, we can select hip, command or control click the character. Let's bring back the polygons. Under skin, bind skin, we know the option box are correct as we left it last, so it remembers, and bind skin. So now when we go here to rotate this, you can see that the rotation manipulator is in the right way. Now it's time to create the control rig. Under the rigging menus, we need to go to the controls and create control rig. And here is the automated rig, which is really useful for transferring motion data between characters or animated models. We can use this among platforms and applications. Like Motion Builder, we can get motion clips, animation clips, and transfer them to our characters here in Maya, because Human Eye Key is a system of joints and constraints and eye keys and controllers that have this naming convention that is compatible among platforms for animation. It's very, very useful in that way. Okay, so here in the controls panel, you can see that there are all the controllers that you can select from here, which is very useful sometimes when these controllers get lost in the models. This is the main controller. So if you want to move this character from the main controller, let me remove the joints. So now our character is ready to be animated. Next, we're going to see how we can bring in a animation clip and apply to this character. But beforehand, we need to start doing some painting, which is necessary. In this case, it's giving us really good, it's not bad at all, but in the areas like this one, we need to go ahead and do some painting. Which is pretty good at just first hand here, but here, for example, I need to go ahead and do some painting for this area. This is for the elbow deformation. So here is where we need to go ahead and do some painting too. And so go ahead and test your character, and in the next step we're going to show some painting features and also bring in some clip animations to this character.